Delighted to welcome Martin Lewis, the founder and executive chair of Money Saving Expert, who really doesn't need an introduction. And thank you for sparing the time from your busy life. And likewise to Fumi Olufunwa, who's a finance expert and founder of Hoop Finance. So welcome to you, and thanks for giving your time too. And Michael Johnson, who is a research fellow, who was also architects of the initial version of this. So I think from your evidence, Mr. Johnson, what has turned out as the lifetime ISA isn't exactly what you originally proposed. So I wanted to kick off with a simple question that I touched on there at the beginning, and if I can work from left to right with you, please, Mr. Lewis. This is a hybrid product that's got a complexity of design because it's trying to do two things at once. Do you think that's a problem? And if so, what could you do with the current product to try and resolve that?
I think the Lifetime ISA has been a very successful product for first-time buyers, though has some major holes, and I'm sure we'll come on to later the getting rid of the withdrawal penalty, which is one of the core ones. But the idea you can get £1,000 a year free towards your first home has been very useful, and in this age where we have the need for a deposit, a 5% deposit, although preferably a 10% deposit, which is why the Lifetime ISA is so useful, I think it's been beneficial. The pension-linked element, or more accurately, the retirement savings-linked element, is a problem. And it caused the unintended consequence. There are no major providers who offer lifetime ISAs. You cannot get it from a high street bank. You cannot get it from a high street, any main provider. So you're talking fintech and modern innovative finance organisations. Now, while that is very good in its own right, the lack of availability, the lack of marketing from mainstream financial providers means that it has not had the take-up it should. And the very simple reason they won't do it is they think they're going to be done for mis-selling. And they'll be done for mis-selling because if you ask me who should use a lifetime ISA for retirement, I would say no employee unless they've maxed out their auto-enrolment, because that smacks the pants off the lifetime ISA for retirement savings. No higher or top rate taxpayer, because the tax benefits on retirements on pensions are way better than the lifetime ISA. And it's roughly equal between a lifetime ISA and a self-employed person on basic rate tax. For all of those reasons, you can see why, when the huge majority population should always be saving first in a pension, that the banks, with all the mis-selling campaigns, and hey, I've been at the forefront of making sure that if they're irresponsible, we pursue them to try and take that money back, that the banks have gone, we just don't want to touch this because we're going to get people telling us they used it for retirement things, and in 20 years they'll say, you should have told me to get a pension. And that has been a real problem. Now, I don't have a specific issue with the duality of the product. I think I understand why it was brought in and the idea, but there has to be a way to limit the liability, make sure there's proper communication at the point of sale so that we could bring in some of the big financial institutions. I don't know if you have any of them giving evidence. I think it'd be useful because we need to know what is it that would turn the corner to enable you to say, yes, we will offer lifetime ISAs. But in reality, the lifetime ISA is almost invariably a product that first-time buyers get for their savings. I got a question this morning on social media from someone asking me, they've kept it open, can I now use it for retirement savings afterwards? To which I said, yes, but if you're an employee, I strongly suggest you look at going to your pension first, because that's likely to be better for you. And that confusion and difficulty of conversation and complexity of product isn't helpful for something that's meant to be mainstream. Okay. So overall, there shouldn't be a problem, but it's been structured in a way that creates a problem.
Okay, so Fumi Olufunwa, you've set up an organisation because of financial literacy issues, and I think Mr. has very clearly set out some of the challenges of someone selling this product to somebody. So what are your views on this hybrid product?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Martin has said, and Mr. Lewis has said. But what I would also... Thank you. But what I would also add to that is when we're looking at it from the retirement income or the retirement income perspective, I do think there is a concern that there is a cash element or cash version of this. I think we all know that if we're looking at long-term savings, doing that with cash, there's the impact of inflation. So by allowing that to happen or providing a product for that, is there a risk that we're almost sort of saying this is a good thing to do? So when we're looking at it from that perspective, I think that it doesn't really work as well. And as Mr. Lewis has said, Martin has said, there are other things that are better for that. I do think that people should have choice. I don't think they should be forced to do things or use products that they don't want to. But I do think that for that particular element of it, it doesn't work as other things could.
I'm tempted to go. I'm just going to ask you one more question, because the background you talk about the financial literacy issue, and actually we have a lot of talk about lazy capital, but there is a big impact on this compared with a pension because of the rate of increase. Do you think people understand that? Your experience of Hoops Finance? Understand the difference between leaving something in a cash savings investment versus a stocks and shares investment?
No, I don't think enough people fully understand the impact of that. I don't think enough people understand the impact of inflation. I don't think enough people understand about investing. I think we have a huge issue, and that's why I set up my organisation, of lack of financial literacy. And I think if we're going to have a product like this, and we want people to make informed choices, we do need that to underlie those choices.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Johnson.
I disagree fundamentally with something that Mr. Lewis has said, because it's factually wrong. The majority of people in this country are basic rate taxpayers whilst working, and will become basic rate taxpayers in retirement. If one has a choice between a lifetime ISA and a pension product with identical investments in the two, then the lifetime ISA will produce unambiguously a 17.6% better return. Full stop. And that is because of the differences in tax treatment. Up front, the tax relief and bonus are economically equivalent. And this is the first point about communication challenge. A 25% bonus on a lifetime ISA is the same as 20% tax relief. At the rear end, when one's drawing down and withdrawing funds, of course the lifetime ISA is entirely free of tax. The pension pot, 25% is tax-free, the other 75% will be taxed at 20% for the vast majority of basic rate taxpayers, who are basic rate taxpayers. That results in a 17.6% better return for holding a lifetime ISA. Now, Mr. Lewis referred to mis-selling. Yes, I think there is great scope for mis-selling, but it's not perhaps the way that we think of it. And the second aspect of major difference between those two product arenas is, of course, to do with the free option concerning early access for the purchase of the first home. So I want to make this crystal clear. The lifetime ISA is an economically better product than a pension pot for the vast majority of the population. Full stop. Now, if I may, Madam Chair, row back to the origins.
I just, as you've mentioned, Mr. Lewis, I just think it would be helpful if I could hear Mr. Lewis' perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think if my duck had legs and barked, it would also be a dog. And I think that's the equivalence that you've just given. Look, the lifetime ISA, first of all, the majority of basic rate taxpayers are employees and therefore have a match contribution through auto-enrolment. There are also many people who aren't. So we're not talking the majority of the country, we're talking a minority of self-employed basic rate taxpayers. You said under equivalent investments. There aren't the equivalent investments generally in lifetime ISA products as there are into pensions. So what you're saying, if the product worked well, I think you have a legitimate argument.
Yeah, just to be, when you say you, it's just helpful to say
sorry, Mr. Johnson. But the product doesn't. And it's not me who's saying it's missold. There is a very practical, obvious example of the risk. And the fact is, no big banks offer this product because they're worried about the mis-selling. I would love you to persuade them, and you sound wonderful to do so, but in the practical, I work in the real world, not on paper. In the real world, they don't offer the product. So it's a false equivalence.
Okay, I'm going to bring in a lot of interest in this suddenly. Mr. John Glenn and Mr. John Grady, MP.
Yeah,
Glenn,
can I just sort of try and zone in on the possible differences? Mr. Lewis there has spoken about the fact that under the auto-enrolment regime, you've got this 5%, 3% employer contribution. Doesn't that mean that, in fact, that it isn't like for like? And if in an environment the pensions provision is much more underpinned with a sophisticated provision of non-cash products, whereas, the LISA provision, it's not the provision for reasons that Mr. Lewis said around, the market risk around it, means that in practice, though it might not be desirable. The reality of the pensions environment is much more sophisticated, and with that additional 3%, Mr. Lewis is right with respect to the lack of equivalence of the two products.
I think introducing the workplace arena, which is the assumption that we're all making here, is that within the automatic enrolment framework, there is automatically a contribution from employer and employee going to the pension pot. Yes, but there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't include the lifetime ISA in that same regime, as was originally proposed in the papers I put to the Chancellor in 2014.
I mean, your extensive written evidence does point out the fact that the LISA has evolved with the penalty and those other rules isn't what you put up.
Absolutely not.
So I mean,
there are four major differences. It'd be very helpful to air them, actually.
Yeah. But I mean, I think we do need to get on the record the fact that in reality, the way that with auto-enrolment, and you have the employer contribution alongside the other, it doesn't really make them equivalent. It's very, very misleading to say that, surely.
I disagree, because there's absolutely no reason, and this is, in reality, many people have both products. It isn't the question of A or B.
Well, isn't it? But isn't it effectively, then, Mr. Johnson? Isn't it really a better supplementary vehicle for basic rate taxpayers?
I think it's a complementary vehicle.
For those who've got enough money to...
But let's be clear, and this is something that profoundly influenced the catalyst for even writing about something called lifetime ISA, was how do people behave in reality? And in 2012-14, when this initial thinking was put together, if one talks to the under 35s, they prioritise first home ownership above everything else. And it's perhaps a clever instance that last month Standard Life produced the result of a major survey about behaviours. So we're talking about real world behaviours. And they concluded that up to the age of mid-30s, first home ownership ranks way above any other objective for the saver. So in designing the lifetime ISA and presenting it to the Chancellor as I did, I was taking that fundamentally into consideration. And yes, we have a chameleon product. But crucially, the saver is in control. The saver can decide, is this a relatively short-term savings product for me to be able to afford what I primarily am interested in, which is home ownership? If so, I can go down that route. Alternatively, I can think of it as a pension pot. And I can leave it alone until I'm 60, I can accumulate those bonuses, and then I will have a considerably better return on that pot relative to, for example, a SIP.
Okay, well, there are obviously issues where people can't use it for the first and end up being trapped in second, but we'll come to that in a moment. Ms. Onifumwa, there's been a lot of heat here. Would you like to just comment on that particular point before I bring in Mr. Grady on the point of disagreement between Mr. Lewis and Mr. Johnson?
I think Mr. Johnson's obviously has extensive knowledge in this area. I still, though, believe that if you're looking at the two, the using either a pension and contributing towards a pension, or using the lifetime ISA for your later income in retirement, I do still think that for the majority of people, it would be better for them if they were using the non-cash version. When you're looking at the two, a pension would be better. But if you're looking at the retirement income, I do still think that we need to go back to kind of directing people, I guess, towards stocks and shares version.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Mr. John Grady.
Thank you very much, Dame Meg. I guess my question to each of the panel, and it's really rather a yes-no answer, I hope, is the minor disagreement between Mr. Lewis and Mr. Johnson turns on a range of modelling features: tax in, tax out, whether you get employer matching contributions, your investment choice, whether that investment choice is available, whether you can actually go to a provider and get a worldwide tracker for the 40 years or whatever. But if a busy mum or dad with a young kid was watching both of you have this discussion, would it not illustrate the essential truth here, that it's all too jolly complicated for individual savers?
Yes, clearly, and that's why the idea of doing some type of academic research to defend a legacy that's something you came up with 20 years ago that hasn't worked like that in practice is complete nonsense.
And yes/no answer from maybe Ms. Olafunwa as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the work I do, when I do my finance workshops, one of the two topics that people want to talk about or want to try and understand better is pensions and how to get on the property ladder. When it comes to pensions, a lot of people don't understand how they work. They don't necessarily appreciate how their workplace pension works. They don't necessarily appreciate that there's a difference between the state pension and the workplace pension. They can also, if they want to, take out their own personal pension. There is so much that is not understood. And yeah, there's a lot of complexity when it comes to these types of products. So, to your point, I guess a busy parent, would be like, this is quite confusing.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Rachel Blake MP.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, you said that this product had been successful for first-time buyers. Any more or less successful than any other comparable products?
Well, there's only one comparable product, which is the Help to Buy ISA. And, I have a whole graph I do on my show when I compare the two, because both two are still available right now. The basic summary is the Help to Buy ISA is far more flexible because you can put money in and take money out when you like. You could use it much more quickly. But the bonus is much bigger on the Lifetime ISA. The Lifetime ISA also allows you to buy a bigger house up to 450,000. Help to Buy ISA is only 250,000 outside London. The one other difference that was really important in any changes that are made should maintain the Help to Buy ISA was paid at exchange. That was a big problem. The Lifetime ISA is paid at completion, which is correct. The problem with the Lifetime ISA, and that we all need to recognise, is the penalty for withdrawal. Now, I have no problem with the withdrawal penalty in its own right. I have a problem with it for first-time buyers buying a house. So what we have a succession of young people who are saving in the vehicle they have been encouraged to save in by the state, who are then trying to use their savings to buy a first-time property, but due to house price inflation, their property has just tripped above the £450,000 level. And then not only do they not get the £1,000 a year bonus they were intended to get, which I understand and it's legitimate, there's a threshold, they are fined by the state effectively 6.25% of their own money in order to withdraw that money to get the cash out. And the problem with that is not just for the individuals who it affects. When I do television programs on the Lifetime ISA, I have to warn people about that. And when I warn them about that, because you have to have the caveat, you should only save in this if you are definitely going to buy a property under £450,000, instantly we have a huge dropout in the number of people who get it. So the sentiment that does is very negative. Generally, in every other way, the Lifetime ISA is potentially superior, but not in that way, and that needs to change.
We're going to come to that, I think.
But very briefly, the government is spending £500 million on this. Is this the best they could do? Because there's other things the government can do with that money, and I'm interested in whether or not it's the right thing that they should be doing.
Looking purely at first-time buyers, right, I'm far less bothered about the retirement element. We don't have many people who seem to use that, and I don't get many questions about it from the public. Focused on that. I think because we have it in place, because it is there, it is a good use of the money if it were fixed and it were improved. Now, if you ask me if we were drawing it up from a blank slate, would I go there? Well, I haven't done the work something equivalent. But we're not on a blank slate. I just live in the practical world. We've got a LISA, it's got a brand, people use it. Lots of people who've succeeded on it talk about it in a positive sense. My big concern is as we push towards more people buying homes and we try and free that up, everything we do to pump money in the housing market has some counterproductivity. It increases house prices, so there's a level of defeat. I have a concern that both the current and past governments have consistently used the narrative of pushing people to buy houses with a 5% deposit. 5% deposit means get an expensive mortgage. I would try and push people up to 10%. The Lifetime ISA is quite a useful vehicle to actually give people the opportunity to go one step further, up to 10%, to increase the cost of the mortgage and to give them a little bit more financial security in the long run. So I can't give you an answer because I haven't done a full study of what could we do better, because I've been looking at this product in its own right. But I think from where we are now, if we fixed some of the major holes, this could work really well, and I think Mr. Johnson's legacy would live on well.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Dean, Mr. Bobby Dean.
Thank you. I'm going to disclose at the beginning that I'm a Lifetime ISA user, and I did actually use it to help save for my first flat. But I will admit that now there's 70 pence sitting in that account, and it's been that way for a number of years. So I guess my question, first of all, maybe I can start with you, for me, is my experience common? Have a lot of people done that, essentially empty their accounts out to buy the first home and left them, or are you seeing different behaviour, or what percentage of people are making use of it after purchasing their home?
Solifull one.
The majority of people that I talked to about using the LISA, the lifetime ISA, are doing it to buy their first home. The people that have money in the lifetime ISA who've already bought their first home, it's because they effectively weren't able to use the LISA. So maybe they were buying a home that exceeded the £450,000 cap. Yeah. So they made a choice. Do they actually lose the bonus and some of their own money and take the money out and use that? Or do they leave it in there? Some people have been fortunate, I guess, to still be able to buy the property without the LISA money, so they've left it in there. Yeah. A small minority of people that I speak to have intentionally used the lifetime ISA for retirement savings, but that is the small minority. The vast majority, it's because they want to use it to buy property.
Okay, Mr. Lewis?
From my experience, I'd say exactly the same. I don't have data on it. I can poll on it by tomorrow morning if you want me to.
Yes, please.
I get my phone out now.
We'll have it minuted, I'm sure. Mr. Johnson, I think everybody has this impression of the product behaving in this way. Most people are going for the first-time buyers. I appreciate you're putting forward good arguments for why somebody might want to use it as a retirement product. But wouldn't it be more straightforward for us to just split the product and to have one solely focused on the first-time buyer purchases, and maybe a very similar product that you can market in a different way to the pensions market? Would that not be the best way forward?
I think we have far too many products out there already. May I just debunk a myth, which is the impact that the lifetime ISA is having on property prices? If one actually gets some data and crunches it, last year the lifetime ISA drawings contributed less than 1% of the capital was spent by first-time buyers. I suggest to you that has minimal impact on the pricing of home. And I think the question that you've just asked concerning behaviours subsequently, maybe once one has bought a home, it's too early to tell. Let us be clear, this thing's only been going since 2017, and in the years there's going to be next to nothing in it anyway. And I think maybe it's a question we ought to revisit in a decade's time.
Just to come back to my core question then, is your primary argument then there's too many products out there already, so we don't want to add another retirement product in, even if you think this product's more valued than others? Is that your core argument to not splitting up? It's not
my core argument is to go right back to the beginning and state clearly why was the lifetime ISA launched? And it was partly as to put a foot into the water to test, ultimately scrapping all pensions tax relief.
To shift the liability later, was it?
No, nothing to do with that. It's to do with the fundamental question that we as a society accept that income tax is progressive. Therefore, tax relief is regressive. And the distribution of tax relief we all look at every year, I'm sure, is hugely skewed to those who least need it. The lifetime ISA, by introducing a bonus that is disconnected from tax-paying status, was absolutely the first step to doing away with all pensions tax relief. And ultimately, the merger of the ISA and pension worlds. That is why it was launched, amongst other reasons. Brexit then intervened.
I think I might pick up on that, but I just want to have one final broader question. And it speaks a bit to the value for money element, as Ms. Blake was explaining. Is one of the benefits of this product the actual behaviour that it generates, the saving habits that it generates? I'm going to reflect on my own experience. Trying to save for a home is hard, but if you've got a product that makes it difficult makes you think twice about withdrawing from your savings, also incentivises you with that bonus element, it keeps you locked into that savings habit a bit stronger than you would do via other products.
That was absolutely yes. Sorry to interrupt, but this is a very important point about behaviour. The fundamental point and behavioural aspect of the lifetime ISA is the saver can choose. Am I going to, once I have that product, well, let me step back. If I'm a 30-year-old thinking about pension or ISA or else, if I put money into a pension, I know for certain I can't get it until I'm 57. Therefore, that is a barrier to saving within that framework. Lifetime ISA was presented with the argument, you can always change your mind.
Yeah, I guess the
And,
point
and, and therefore the penalty, and I totally agree with Mr. Lewis, the penalty is a nonsense.
we will come
and
back
was
to the
absolutely
penalty.
not.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We will come
plan.
back to the penalty element. I guess the question I'll ask the rest of the panel is, there is potential that the government could design a different product, maybe offers a similar financial incentive. But is there anything unique in this product that you think should be retained in whatever the government might come up with if it decides to abolish the
Exactly, Mr. Dean.
Mr. Lewis.
Mr. Lewis.
I think conceptually, the idea from the time was this lifelong savings product. That was sort of the theory that you would, but it was given two nodes, right? For a house, for a pension. It wasn't given more flexibility, which I think I remember discussed at the time with the Chancellor, maybe not what you came up with, but clearly there were other ideas going on in Parliament, and I do think, shifting the liability later down the path was also something that the Chancellor at the time was quite interested in doing, if I remember it rightly. But I think the idea of a lifelong savings product was within this. Now, we have that within ISAs generally. An ISA is something that you put money in, you're allowed to put a certain amount in each tax year, and then stays tax-free year after year after year to bring the savings habit. This is, this is an ISA on steroids, if you like, because you get the £1,000 bonus on top, so it encourages young people to get straight into the savings habit. And I think that is beneficial. Where I don't think it works particularly, or hasn't worked in practice, I understand all the reasons why it should have worked, but hasn't in practice, is the continuity once people take their money out for a first-time property. I think there are a lot of people with their 70p's in there. I suspect there are very few people with much more than 70p in there once they've bought their first-time house. I will do some polling on that, but intuitively, I would be surprised if that was anything more than 10 or 15% of people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dean. Dame Harriet Baldwin, MP.
Thank you, Chair, and I should declare that I was a Treasury Minister at the time that this was announced in the budget, and I think it's very interesting for me to look now 10 years on and see what's worked and what's not worked, what could be improved. And I wanted to go out a little bit more on the withdrawal penalties. We heard very clearly from Mr. Lewis his case for it not being penalised if you do happen to just go over the 450. I wanted to assume that both the other panellists both agree with that in terms of you'd like to see that reform to the withdrawal penalty. Would you, Mr. Johnson?
The proposal I put was the withdrawal charge was 20%, i.e. no penalty. Yeah. And therefore the introduction of the penalty, which of course is implicit, not explicit, and there's great miscommunication around this subject, was an unpleasant surprise when it was launched.
So there is agreement from
Totally.
all three of our panellists that you'd like to see that modification, and there was experience during the pandemic of a 20%
Yes.
withdrawal penalty. And are you in favour of that, of reverting to that? Is effectively what you're saying?
So, absolutely. Just because I know there are people watching, just to say that is, many people think if you add 25% and take off 25%, you get back to where you started. You don't. You end up with 6.25% less than where you started. If you add 20% and then have a 20% withdrawal penalty, roughly you get back to where you started, which we are, when we say no penalty, we mean a 20% penalty, which means you just don't get the bonus because of the way the scheme is structured.
So the COVID model, basically.
Yeah,
Can we just be clear
COVID
about
model,
language? Sorry, you don't mean a 20% penalty. You mean a 20% withdrawal charge?
I mean, in the real world, it's a penalty. I don't work in your academic world. I communicate to
Sorry,
proper
not
people
an
who understand how
academic.
the product's
I think,
work.
it's very clear where
Well,
where
you
that
knew what I was
stands,
talking
yeah.
about. You didn't need to pick it up, mate. Right,
Okay.
shall I
Do
carry
the
on?
chair, I think, then we keep things
So,
seated. Mr. Lewis.
so I think where we have to go now, the question, the nuanced question, which is one to design, is when you charge 20% and when you charge 25%. Under the current system, you charge when you charge 20% and when you would charge a 25% penalty. Under the current system, it's always 25% penalty. Now, what you could do is you could drop it so that whenever you withdraw your money from a lifetime ISA, you have a 20% penalty. So effectively, you get back what you put in plus the interest that you had. And that would give it sort of lifelong flexibility. You just wouldn't get the bonus. But as a bare minimum, and I would like to see that, and that may well be a useful trial experiment to see if it would turn into a lifelong savings product. But I think the urgent and the immediate action is to make sure that when someone is buying a house for the first time, the very worst case scenario is there's a 20% penalty, and that could be done through solicitors.
And I think you've made that point very, very clearly to the committee. And Ms. Olafunwa, would you make any other modifications to the withdrawal penalty?
No, I wouldn't. So as in, I would agree that we should basically put people back in the position that they were in, that they're not losing any of their own money. So and people are broadly support this. Actually, they appreciate that if they're buying a property, for example, and it goes over the cap, and we can discuss what the cap should or shouldn't be, they appreciate that, okay, fair enough, I don't get the bonus. But what really frustrates people, and they think is so unfair, is that they're losing their own money. So people are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
They're doing the things that we've told them to do. They want to save for a property, and they're doing that. And then they feel that the rug is being pulled out from underneath them through no fault of their own, because they personally cannot control house prices.
So is it acting, the withdrawal penalty itself, if you can try and just focus on that aspect, is it acting as a deterrent to people from opening these accounts in the first place?
Yeah, it absolutely is. When I speak to people about this, and I've written down some of the words that people have used, because I think at the centre of all of this, we talk about data and we talk about figures, but it's people's lives. They want to buy homes. They want to buy somewhere that they can live, safety and security for their family. They want to start families and grow families. And there's a real human element to this that when I talk to people, they are really frustrated. They feel it's really unfair. They can't believe that the state is effectively doing this to them.
So that's the biggest deterrent, is it? The withdrawal penalty?
I think one of the biggest deterrents. People say that they're actually, and I've written down they're fearful. Someone actually said it feels like a bit of a scam. And one person said it's terrifying. I'm trying to make this decision, and it feels like a massive decision. I'm putting all of my money into this product, but I'm literally terrified that when I come to use it, I won't be able to, and then I'm going to lose some of my own money. So I do absolutely think that it's restricting some people from even opening them
in the first place.
Yeah.
And Mr. Lewis,
Just to support every word that was said, what's really interesting when I've talked about get a large amount of feedback on the back of this, the people who are most put off this are those from risk-averse backgrounds, which tend to be people from the lowest income backgrounds. So I have educated middle-class students who've talked to me about this, and I talk about the penalty. They go, oh, well, if I have to pay the penalty, I'll take the risk. I tend not, and I know this is anecdotal, but I tend not to get that from people from non-university backgrounds who are looking to save. For them, the risk of losing money is too great. So therefore, the nature of the penalty and the deterrent of the penalty is not just a problem and right, it's a social equality problem and a social opportunity problem, because this is a greater deterrent from those from less financially educated backgrounds.
and Mr. Johnson, more people last year paid this penalty than actually used their LISA to buy their first home. Do you regard that as a design failure?
It's certainly not desirable, and it wasn't in the original design. So yes, it's an implementation failure. But I think, let's bear in mind, again, there's some interesting numbers that have appeared about the consequences in the 1 year when the withdrawal charge was cut from 25 to 20%. So in the year prior to that taking place, the average withdrawal on a monthly basis was about 3.7 million. In the final month of the year when the charge was cut to 20%, it was 50.6 million. A dramatic change.
That was partly to do because it was COVID.
That was obviously introduced because of the...
Because it also, just to be clear, of course, it is taken into account if you're claiming universal credit, so people were having to withdraw because they couldn't claim.
And it was also that penalty withdrawn for everybody. It wasn't just for buying a first-time property. That was an open, you can get your money back.
People needed it. Lots of constituents writing to us desperate to get them.
I think it's important to bear in mind that in parallel with the work you're doing, there is the Treasury looking at financial resilience. And this is a very good example, the lifetime ISA being brought in during an emergency situation during COVID, which greatly assisted in financial resilience, and it was achieved by reducing that withdrawal charge from 25% to 20%.
Thank you, Dame Harris.
Can I just add one?
Please,
Can I just add one point? So some of the people that I've spoken to have said, in relation to if they've used it to save for retirement income, that when it comes to withdrawal penalty, if they're withdrawing before age 60 because of maybe poor health, so they can't work as much and they need some income, they also believe that in that instance there shouldn't be a withdrawal penalty, because again, it's your own money, you're being punished for something that again is outside of your control.
Of course, the only loss of the penalty, if you're within 12 months of dying, you lose, but not if you're just in general poor health.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We haven't seen any examples of that because the product hasn't been going
hasn't
long enough
issued,
for
yes,
that.
yes.
to
There
be
is
an
a
issue.
fear,
Yeah.
and again that kind of points towards people
Yeah.
maybe not being as willing to use the product because of that fear.
Thank you very much. You and Young MP.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions related to distributional elements as well, and also the impact on means testing for entitlement on the LISA. First is, I think, Mr. Lewis, you mentioned before that the most risk-averse individuals, particularly low-income individuals, will be put off investing in a LISA because of withdrawal penalty. So I was wondering if I could hear from the three of you your sense of what is the typical demographic of the people who are actually using the LISA the most, and is the money that the government is spending, as my colleague Ms. Blake mentioned earlier, actually being spent in a progressive way? I'll start with Ms. Olive Fanwa first.
Yeah. I'm probably not really in a position to say if it's being spent in the right way. I don't have enough information to comment on that. But I would say that in terms of the demographic of people that are using the LISA, it's a lot of people. It's, like I said, the majority of people that I talk to about it, they're using it for the intention of buying their first home. They're not thinking about using it for income when they're age 60 plus, unless they've effectively been forced to leave it in there.
And of those people who are buying it for their first home, do you have a sense of where they lie in the income spectrum?
I'd say it's a broad range. I think it's a broad range of people.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, it's free money. So who doesn't like free money? So, once they know about it. And actually, another point, the How to Buy ISA was really, really well known. And I think the language helps. It was called the Help to Buy ISA. Mm-hmm. We have other products, for example, I know it's not related to the LISA, but we have the Help to Save product. Mm-hmm. It kind of does what it says on the end. Mm-hmm. Lifetime ISA for a lot of people doesn't really mean anything. So a lot of people have come back to me, and when I talk about it, they're like, I didn't even know that existed. And I don't think how it's named is that helpful.
Yeah. The name came about because the proposal for the product was it was going to be available from birth until death. That's why it's called the Lifetime ISA. And there was, again, it was a somewhat unpleasant surprise when it emerged, for me anyway, to see it.
Yeah, well, we've read your evidence, which is absolutely...
Mr. Lewis, what's your sense of the demographics who are using the product?
I have no distributional data, so I simply don't know that. But I do think this is an every person product. One of the things I often talk about is a great present for your child's birthday is put up a Lifetime ISA, because of course you have the 1 year that it has to be open before you can get the bonus. So I tell everyone, get £1 in, and then when you're ready to use it, you don't have to wait a year, because if you're going to make rules that are a bit silly, not you but Parliament, then it's my job to try and show people
Treasury
how
officials, I suspect.
which Treasury officials, and I'm sure some ministers signed it off as well too. But if that's going to happen, then it's the job, to try and get the public to use it in the way that can work best for them. So I think that 1 year system, I understand why it's in place, but getting people to think ahead. But lots and lots of, and this is one of the issues, parents tend to be, for the younger people, the ones pushing their children to get it. Right? Now, look, if you're 35, it's slightly different. If you're 18, 19, 20, it is. And the number of people who say, how do I open one for my child? And my answer is, you don't. You give your child your money and they have to open one. It's their product, and that's the right way for it to do as well, is important. But we just don't have distributional data. I suspect your next session will do.
Mr. Lewis, when you said earlier that the withdrawal penalty puts off those who are most risk-averse, do you think that hits low-income people the hardest?
I have enormous amounts of feedback, but we don't filter them for demographics. That's the issue. But my intuition from those amounts of feedback and the way that people write them to me, when you can tend to tell who understands the finance a little bit more and who understands our finance a little bit less. As with all things, the more financially educated you are, the more you tend to engage in products. The less financially educated you are, the less you would tend to engage in products. And when there is an off-putting thing like a penalty, that will disproportionately go to those who are less financially educated, who tend to be those from lower income backgrounds. There's a lot of ifs and buts in my sentence, but intuitively that would be the way I would see it.
Thank you. And Mr. Johnson, any thoughts on the distributional effects of this?
I've got it's not something I've looked at, and I don't have access to that sort of information. But if I may suggest a nudge or possibly a shove in terms of behaviours, if we go back to the wonderful days of child trust funds and £500 that was in there to begin with, that was the proposal for the lifetime ISA as well. Didn't happen. And I was, again, sad not to see
Of
it
course,
happen.
and just to be clear for anyone watching, the child trust funds now defunct fund.
Have gone, and that's why
With,
the plan was to resurrect it.
and there are a number of children with money in there who don't have it. So thank you, Ms Young.
600,000. Go to gov.uk if you want to trace your old child
Indeed,
trust fund.
previous committee, other committees have done some work on this, and absolutely worth highlighting. Rachel Blake MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. To Ms Funwa, we are thinking about the price cap and the impact that that's having. For great swathes of London and the South East, this product is essentially irrelevant. So you've talked about wanting to increase the property. What impact would that have on opportunities for people who want to buy their first home in London and in the South East?
In terms of using the lifetime ISA, I think it would give people the confidence to actually use it. I think it would depend on the way in which the price increase was implemented. I think we need to give people the assurance, or as much assurance as possible, that if they save into this product, they're not going to then be hit with a penalty or losing some of their own money. So if they can actually see figures which seem to make sense in the context of the properties that they're looking at, then I think people will be more encouraged to use the lifetime ISA product.
Are there other categories that might help? For example, bedroom numbers that could be equivalent caps to use of the fund?
I've not really thought about that. Potentially, I think we'd need to go back and have a look at that. I think what we need to remember is that people are buying homes or buying their first home later and later, and they're getting older and older, and they're not necessarily buying the sort of starter home that they might have bought decades ago. So it's no longer sort of a one-bedroom flat with no garden. It may now be they're buying in a couple, or they might already have a child or want to grow their family. More people maybe now have blended families. They might have children as stepchildren. So the types of homes that people are looking at as a first home is very different. They're generally bigger, and therefore they're generally more expensive.
The median house price in my constituency is £1 million. How could that be?
We should say that Ms Blake represents the cities
An
of London
unusual
and Westminster.
case.
City and Westminster, so she is in a particular
constituents to come and live in Richmond. You're very welcome.
Well, there will be people in my constituency who are not able to buy their first home, and who it's important to stay within communities that are just minutes away from here. So how could you make the case for value for money when with such a significant median house price?
I mean, I think there does have to be some sort of cap. I think we have to be reasonable about, how this product is going to be used. The average property price of £1 million is a lot of money. I'm not suggesting that would be the cap. But I think we need to look at maybe average house prices in different areas and use that to help. If we look at the 450,000, that was back in 2017. Property prices have probably increased by around about 30% since then. So if we kind of were to inflate the cap to reflect that, we're looking at around, I think it's about £585,000 as an average. Now, we could do something, I guess, a little bit similar to the Help to Buy, so where there was an inside and an outside, but I think even that is not necessarily as helpful. Maybe we need to go a bit more granular and look at different areas and have different caps that way. Or we could just have the average. I think we need to look at different ideas.
Thank you.
I'm struggling to understand what consumer purpose the house price cap serves. What is it trying to achieve?
I think there's my view is that there's an overall money for the taxpayer on the overall price cap. I think that there are my view is that there are trade-offs to be made around where you would allocate public subsidy into this form of incentivising home ownership.
The average, and average is a dangerous word, but I'm afraid it's the
Median.
data that we tend to have. The average price of a first-time home in the last decade has doubled. Now, if we go back to the time when the thinking was going on, which was approximately a decade ago, And though I certainly didn't advocate a house price cap, maybe we should double the one we've got.
So you would be proposing to double the cap?
I propose to get rid of it, but if you'd like to have one, then I suggest if you want to be consistent with the doubling of first-time house purchases prices in the last decade, then we should double the cap.
I certainly think there might be some issues for ministers on that, but Mr. Bobby Dean,
But
MP,
just
on this,
the costs to the Treasury of this product are tiny.
well,
so
Mr. Bobby Dean,
I wanted to pick up on that. I mean,
So just finish that. But there are alternative uses of what you present as comparatively tiny. There are alternative uses, and that's the function.
Can I
we're
answer
trying
on this
to
question?
drive into.
I'm going to follow up. So maybe if I can ask a follow up.
Mr. Lewis, and then we'll come to Mr. Dean.
But so
Mr.
it was
Dean.
£500 million in the last tax year, but we all kind of accept that the product's not being taken up at the rate it could be. And so hopefully if we fix that problem and maybe all the major high street banks get involved, it will be taken up by a lot more people, and that'll be good for those people, but it will cost the Chancellor Exchequer more. And I'm not sure how the public will react if that's being used to buy £1 million homes, for example. So I think I accept that not moving the cap at all could create a long-term disincentive to save, because it might take them 10 years to save their home, and the uncertainty about whether or not they're going to meet the cap in 10 years could be a problem. So the cap probably does need to move, but how much does it need to move by, and should there be a hard limit to this? Should it be able to purchase any home whatsoever, no matter how expensive, or should we be thinking about the distribution impact of this?
I think it's worth remembering, first of all, that on your £1 million home example, the £1,000 a year from a free lifetime ISA is nothing. It's irrelevant. You're going to be looking at £50,000 or £100,000 deposit in the first place, so you're going to have to raise the funds elsewhere. I'm not sure how it would help people. I understand philosophically, I understand Mr. Johnson's argument of why you wouldn't have at all, because it's the same for everybody, and the problem, the bigger the house you buy, the more you're going to have to raise funds separately. But it's not going to, being practical, no chancellor's going to sign it off, and it isn't going to happen, so it's probably not worth considering. What I would say, I think we got a little bit confused. We need to be very careful. The argument over the level of the cap is a subsidiary argument to the withdrawal penalty. If you have a withdrawal penalty, then the cap is absolutely crucial, and the fact that we have not increased it with average house prices year on year is a manifest unfairness that puts people off the product, gives people no transparency and no consistency. Now, if park that for 1 second and say, let us look in a world where if you are buying your first time property, you pay a 20% penalty, i.e. you get your money back if it's going to be above threshold. Then the cap becomes a secondary measure, because what it doesn't do is put anybody off. What you can say to people is, you put me in this product, we now have all mainstream providers providing it, so it's more competitive, so interest rates will be better. And just like I say with the Help to Buy ISA now that has no penalty, there's no risk. Put your money in, as long as you're going to buy a house with it, and with the Help to Buy ISA you can take it out for any reason.
Outside London,
but there's still no risk in a Help to Buy ISA. Because you can get your money out and you get your interest, you just don't get the bonus. If we had a lifetime ISA with no withdrawal penalty, apart from if you didn't, as long as you're buying a house, then the risk is that you choose not to buy a house as opposed to you choose to buy the wrong house. So I think you can't look at the level of the cap and the withdrawal penalty in relation. You have to play two scenarios. With the withdrawal penalty, then the level of the cap is absolutely important, needs to be transparent, and needs to move up year by year. I would still want that. There was no withdrawal penalty. But if you ask me which cross I would die on the cross of getting rid of the withdrawal penalty for anyone who is buying a first home.
So, yeah, I accept that. And I mean, for the sake of this argument, it may well be worth accepting that the government has decided to do away with the withdrawal penalty. So I want to get to the point about the equity point. And Oliver, you said earlier on that it's free money, who wouldn't take it? Now, Mr. Lewis, you did say that a few £1,000s is not a big difference on a £1 million property, which is true, but if it's free money, then people may take it. That could be a dead weight.
We should be clear, I think, Mr. Dean, for the sake of the British taxpayer, it's not free money, it is the taxpayer.
Of course, yeah. I was quoting.
It's a good bonus, yes, indeed.
But my concern is that actually people would see that as free money, and actually it's taxpayer money, and it becomes a dead weight loss to the Chancellor. So again, do we think that we need to have a hard cap on place just to protect the taxpayer?
I think it makes sense to have a level of a cap. I think it makes sense to have some form of cap, because I do appreciate that we do have to look at this from is this, as we're all taxpayers, so is it the right thing to be spending our taxpayer money on? So I do believe there does need to be some level of a cap. I guess it's the question of what that cap is. And I do think we need to look at definitely increasing it from what it was back in 2017.
Very much, Mr. Dean. Mr. John Grady.
Thank you very much, Dame Meg. Just a very quick answer for me, because answers please, because time's marching on, and perhaps one of us. But the SIP minimum pension age, I think, is currently 55 and going up to 57, if I'm right, in 2028. We've got a different state pension age, and then the LISA age is 60. Is this just another example of confusion in the pension saving landscape?
Absolutely.
That's a brilliant answer. Thank you very much. One word.
The pension access should be 6 straight away.
Ms. Olive,
you can see why I'm not a politician.
It's on from where?
I think it does add to the confusion with the different ages for accessing. Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, simple agreement. Thank you very much, Mr. Grady. Mr. John Glenn.
Yeah, I think Mr. Johnson, obviously, I know you well because we worked together in opposition. I should declare that 20 years ago. And I don't think that LISA would have existed without you. But I do understand that your frustrations that comes through, as I said, in your written evidence. But policy development has to interact with a legacy landscape and also a range of products. And if you think about pensions, you've got auto-enrolment, and maybe it hasn't got to an Australian level yet. You've got some provision for tax on interest. You've got the ISA allowance, which has been, we may come on to that, pretty consistent at 20,000. Isn't it the case that your vision really was for this to become an alternative, universal method of saving for pension and for housing? And if we did do that, the taxpayer generally, the burden on the state would be much, much less, because you could have a situation where somebody would get that £1,000 every year on top of their 4,000. They wouldn't then pay any tax on exit. As you say in your evidence, it was an EEE, exempt. But don't you then have a situation? I mean, the reality is that we've gone down the auto-enrolment route. We've got all these different socioeconomic groups with different incentives. We've got a different set of tax advantages for according to how much income you have. That it was only ever realistic, unless you had that wholesale commitment to transfer the whole structure of pension saving in this country, it was never going to be more than a complementary or supplementary vehicle. And then my second question is, given the different inherent interests between a short-term savings product that's probably going to be cash-based in order, because you're going to get the money out quite quickly to put in a deposit, versus something that you want to actually put in equities or something with a higher risk profile if you're doing it before the age of 40 and you're not going to get to it till you're 60. That despite the desire to simplify, that fundamental different objective requires a different sort of vehicle and has a differently regulatory regime. So wouldn't it be better now to actually separate the two, get the one for house saving right, and actually leave this as a redesign it, as my colleague said? Why wouldn't you do that, given the landscape that has evolved over the last 15 years?
Mr. Johnson, start with you.
I thought of I view the lifetime ISA as the first step in something like a 30-year journey to radically simplifying the pensions and savings arena in this country. It is ludicrously complicated. I don't think anyone in the room would disagree with that. The question is, how does one start that journey? And I thought it was really key to illustrate the benefits of disconnecting the incentive from tax-paying status, which addresses the regressive progressive problem. So I think it's a question of interpretation, but I think we also need to be aware that the pensions industry was deeply suspicious of the lifetime ISA even before it was launched, because some within the industry took the view that this was a start towards an ISA-centric framework, full stop, which is not in the pension industry's interests.
Yeah, but wasn't it though? It was though, really, wasn't it? I mean, if this had reached its full extension as your 30-year vision would have had, everyone would have used this as the vehicle to save. They wouldn't have been taxed on the exit. You then have a whole issue around how you advise people, particularly people who aren't very, familiar with financial matters. And it would have fundamentally changed the legacy model that the system's been built around and the investment industry's been built around for generations.
Yes. But let us be clear that, in terms of the Treasury affordability, part of that vision was to do away with things like the ludicrous annual allowance, now 60k, which is irrelevant to virtually everybody in the country, and to bring that down to a number between sort of £5,000 and £8,000 a year. So if we look at the distribution of the incentive to save through lifetime ISAs or pensions or whatever, we look at income distribution with the lowest 50% of the income distribution basically receiving nothing from the state because they don't save. And then it dramatically rises in the last 10 to 12%. I've always envisaged squeezing that down and pushing the toothpaste down to the lower end by dramatically curtailing the annual allowance. Yes, radically progressive, possibly not from somebody working perhaps for the Conservative Party at the time.
I was very sympathetic to it.
You're a good man, sir.
I should just be clear that these are all interesting discussions. We're focused on the lifetime ISA.
Indeed, but the lifetime ISA was the first step to making that manifest.
But that's dead now, isn't it?
Yeah. So, in terms of splitting it, Mr. Lewis, where would you be? And then I'll come to.
Well, look, I mean, we have split it anyway. In practical realities, if you listen to what Fumi said earlier, look, when people ask me about the lifetime ISA buying for a house, what should I do with it? Well, you put it in cash, don't you? Because if you're about to do something in the next 2 or 3 years, in general terms, you want to invest in the market because you don't want to take the risk of crystallising at the wrong moment. So the right thing to do when you're saving as a first-time buyer is to put it in cash. The right thing to do if you're saving for your retirement is to have it in equities. The idea that there'll be this seamless transfer from cash to equities at the nodal point when you take money out to buy it has not worked. Again, I haven't done the polling or the data yet, but in every instinct that I've got through, it hasn't worked. So you would need some form of radical change to the structure and the encouragement. And yes, clearly what you're talking about is an idea no chancellor's been brave enough to do, to get rid of the rewards for higher and top rate taxpayers from saving in a pension. And it would be a brave chancellor who did it, and it would be redistributive, and it would probably be beneficial. But I'm not sure that doing it through the back door through a LISA is everyone's going to go, oh, we didn't notice.
But the other side of Mr. Johnson's proposal, and where it could go if it was ever seriously resurrected by the Treasury, would be that those that had amassed large amounts of money wouldn't pay any tax on exit, which is of course what they do if they have a massive pot. So there would be some compensation for wealthier people.
Well, I understand. For me, the idea was to try and get a sort of UK 401k type savings vehicle to go all the way through. But the way it works at the moment, because, and listening to Mr. Johnson, clearly there's been a death of 1,000 cuts from the original concept to what was brought in the first case, and all these different changes that came through. So the rather overarching strategic philosophical design that originally came in the LISA hasn't manifested in practical terms and is not how people use it. So you would have to do some quite radical change to get back to that. So I am agnostic as to whether you split it or not, because for me, it's a first-time buyer savings product.
I think we've heard that very much from what you wanted to add.
Yeah, nothing.
Thank you. Lola McAvoy MP.
Thank you, Dame Meg. Just on that point specifically about the use of the product as it is now, if we were to split the product and accept that it's being used for first-time buyers, that's brilliant, and reform the second half of the second use of the product to be targeted specifically to self-employed people who are basic tax rate payers. Do you think in those circumstances where we were targeting and encouraging, and that was the eligibility criteria, was that you had to be self-employed and you had to be a basic tax rate payer to use the savings product, do you think it would be for the purpose as a lifetime savings product?
Who are you throwing at
to Mr. Johnson first, because your evidence said about 1 in 5 self-employed people not saving for a pension.
Yes, I think it's probably higher than that. I was in front of another committee in July 22 talking about specifically this, Work and Pensions Committee. We're proposing to introduce a self-employed ISA, which is the sort of thing I think you're working toward if you're talking about splitting. So yes, absolutely. And also to include that within the automatic enrolment framework.
Right.
And then the question is, of course, the devil in the detail with anything discussion to do with self-employed and encouraging them to save is, of course, there's no employer contribution. And therefore what we discussed, and this was with, I think Stephen Twigg was chairing at the time.
Stephen Timms.
Timms, I beg his pardon, was to make use of the difference between Class 1 and Class 4 NECs.
Yeah, and you laid that out very clearly in your evidence. Thank you.
Which was at that time 3%, it's now 2%, but to use that as a mechanism that if self-employed did not make a 2% contribution through being having their self-employed ISA automatically enrolled, then the 2% would go to the Treasury. So it was a kind of a shove rather than a nudge.
Okay, sorry, and you were right, it's I think your evidence said 1 in 5 are saving for a pension of this set of self-employed people.
Yes, it's the other way, yes, as opposed to 80%, and it's a major issue. There are approximately 5 million self-employed. And we've tussled around this particular theme for more than a decade, and to date no government has really been able to crack the problem.
Ms. Olifanwa, in your experience with do you have many self-employed people coming in who are on the basic tax rate? Do you think it would be a suitable product for them as a pension alternative, or what's your view, given your stance at the beginning, for this group specifically?
Yeah, I think it potentially could be, but I guess going back to the point that I made around if you're saving for the long term, saving in cash is probably not the most financially sensible thing to do. So to use it for that specifically for purpose, to kind of discourage people away from saving it in cash.
But just on that point, would you then remove the cash element? And so it's a stocks and shares ISA or a cash ISA. So would you remove if it was for the long-term saving, remove the cash element, which is obviously, as we've outlined, suitable for your first-time buyers, but not necessarily for a 30-year long-term savings product. If you removed that, do you think in that instance, would it be a good product?
I think it would be, but I think we also need to make sure there was the ability for those people to save in another type of cash ISA. So we're not forcing them to only have long-term savings in stocks and shares, to have an alternative as well.
Okay.
I think we're rubbing shoulders here with the productive finance agenda. And obviously now's not the time to go into detail, but I would like to put it on record, I'm distinctly uncomfortable with the whole thing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. And Mr. Lewis, your views on it?
I am somewhat clenching my buttocks at the idea because, look, I did a programme on pensions the other day. We had, I don't know, thousands of responses coming in. By far the biggest question that comes in about pension is consolidation. I can't keep track of all my different pensions from all my different employers and self-employment. You're adding another vehicle. You're adding a level of complexity. Now, if that vehicle could seamlessly be interlinked with the other things that were going on in there, I would be more favourable. But I don't see that happening. So I worry that you're just splitting the message of what you should do, that you're creating an additional choice when the type of people who don't save, the choice is what overwhelms people in the first place, and that you're going to have yet another, I can't remember what I saved to the past issue. And so while I'm sympathetic to the idea, because as a complex financial individual, I like lots of choice and lots of different options, I think for the particular nut that you are trying to crack of people not saving, within the current regime, which I don't see change the general pension regime, on paper it would be quite nice if we did, but within the regime that we had, to add yet another thing in there, to add yet another question, the biggest thing, I get about a third of the questions I get are what I call permission questions. They're where people explain everything that they want to do. I get tens or hundreds of thousands of questions. Everything they want to do, and they go, is that right? And if they don't get permission, they don't do. So by throwing something else in there, what you have at the risk is, but I don't know which one to go for, I just won't do either. That's my concern, not any sort of ideological objection to what you're trying to do, but just practically throwing something else in there to make people make a decision about.
I do take that point, just this final one, because I know we're short on time. I do take that point, Ms. Lewis, because I share your ambition for clear communications and correspondence with the public. So if it's a communication issue and you feel like people wouldn't understand the new product, Are there any products, do you think that with this 1 in 5 stat of self-employed people saving for a pension, the current status quo isn't working either. So what alternatives, I'm not saying to ask you to name a good product, but I just mean what alternatives to this community that we've outlined, self-employed basic rate taxpayers, what alternatives do they have?
I think what I would do is I'd focus on better communicating the existing products that we have. You know, we have a free guidance system at the moment, but they can't, you know, I had on my show the other day, I had an advisor and I had someone from Money Helper who was brilliant and can answer lots of questions. No question they can't answer. So where should I get my self-employed pension? Well, here are the options, but where should I get it? Which provider? They can't answer that. You have to pay for a financial advisor. Financial advisors aren't taking you on unless you've got £50,000 pension fund. So we have a gap when people just want to go, I'll just go and get a stakeholder this one or one of these three. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't make that much difference.
If there's any reassurance, we are keen to look at the advice guidance boundary
The argument should be that the government should be a trusted person to help you.
Government's never trusted.
But I know, but in an ideal world, that would be a suitable product, a government product.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd.
Thank you.
But, Mr. Lewis, you probably have more influence over most people than the government in this domain. But the reality is, the danger of them being in a position where anything goes wrong with that advice, you also know that you'll be asked to campaign on getting the government to come back and do some sort of compensation.
And I think the issue with that is, right, well look, putting money in a pension is putting money in a pension and the risk should be explained, but people should be putting money in a pension. I probably take a little bit of responsibility for what you were talking about earlier, people putting money in cash. I don't talk about investing, and I think it's probably not arrogant of me to say I'm the biggest name in this, right, when it comes to... I don't talk about investing because it's not what I do and I'm not a regulated financial advisor. Now, I often say, just because I don't talk about investing, I'll say on the telly, it doesn't mean it's bad, it's just not my subject, so I don't talk about it. But I do have concerns that my own position, because I'm a savings person, therefore makes people think, well, investing isn't good. And we need more investment communication.
Where's the dividing line?
The regulation about it is so tight, right, that we just don't get the messages because, you know, instantly if I start doing anything out there, you get rent-sinking people. Go, I just told you to do that. I'm going to get you. You're breaking the FCA regulations. And you sit there going, all we're trying to do is encourage people that long-term are probably better in equities.
And a separate area of our work, we are looking, keeping an eye on this advice guidance boundary discussion, including about how AI might...
We've been looking at this advice guidance boundary now for more than 2 decades. And the fundamental that I keep coming up with this is that people are given guidance and they think they've had advice.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, we could, much as we would love to get into this, this is, I'm afraid, not the time. But before we do finish, I did want to pick up on a lot of speculation at the moment in the media, this committee, not on me, and we don't have any inside track about the Chancellor's thoughts about the ordinary average cash ISA. That the current limit, of course, is £20,000 to invest in that, and a lot of people use it and a lot of people like it. There's some discussion that might be reduced to talk about the whole lazy capital argument. I just wondered if you've got any quick thoughts, and I'll go from left to right, if I may, from Mr. Lewis to Mr. Johnson, through just to make sure to see what you think about the cash ISA and any changes to the limit and what impact that might have. Mr. Lewis, if I start with you.
Well, I have already had people telling me that they're worried about what's going on, so they're going to withdraw from cash ISAs, which is clearly not the right thing to do. Your money is in a cash ISA and it has that status in the long run.
So just to be clear, I mean, I think everyone, just to be clear for anyone who's watching, it's not likely that what you've already got in there would be protected.
Which is, of course, what I have been saying and making very, very clear. I don't think we should reduce the cash ISA limit. I think there's also this concept that if you stop people saving in cash, they're going to put money in stocks and shares is false. I think also it's worth remembering we've had a long time of ultra-low interest rates, of which the people who work very hard to put their money away in savings were penalised for effectively. Those very low interest rates really hurt savers. They're fine getting some things back. Many people who've worked hard all their lives living off that income, if you squeeze what people can take out of savings, either by lowering interest or by taxing them, then people have less money to spend, right? And it's not quite as simple logic as, you reduce interest rates or you reduce the amount of money people have and therefore they'll go spending more for savers and people living off their savings. So look, I wouldn't argue for an increase in the cash ISA. I just think that the idea of some of the investment banks who are trying to get rid of the cash ISA in order to encourage people to invest in stocks and shares. To invest people in stocks and shares, you need a cultural change. Lots of young people are putting money in Bitcoin, a highly risky speculation. It's not a form of investment, but it's got some hell of a bit of marketing out there. I don't think this is about let's try and starve people out of one fund to put money in the other.
So you're in favour of keeping the cash ISA as it is?
And better encouragement of investing.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that there's a lot of speculation around at the moment, which I think is particularly helpful and can lead to people doing things that perhaps they shouldn't be doing.
Did you say particularly helpful or particularly unhelpful?
Sorry, particularly thank you. Particularly unhelpful. And I think people like a bit of certainty, and they also want to feel that they can trust the government. There's a lot of people saying, people that I speak to, that part of my community, you know, they're saying that, well, actually, I'm not going to go from investing in a cash ISA directly to investing in a stocks and shares ISA. So what will happen is, if the limit comes down and I can't put as much money in, I will just have my money in a savings account. And then more people are saying, well, actually, is that the intention? Because then that can potentially be taxed. So I think we need to be really clear about what really is going to be the impact if there is a reduction in how much you can save into a cash ISA, and I don't think it's going to have the desired effect of getting people to move from investing in, from saving in cash.
I should stress that's all speculation.
All speculation.
Mr. Johnson.
I think this question rubs shoulders with the productive finance point I made earlier. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that slashing the cash ISA allowance will then automatically trigger waves of sophisticated investing in stocks and shares. Let's not kid ourselves. This is fundamentally an education question.
Thank you.
And should be dealt with in the education arena.
Last very quick point. Ms. Oliver, one then, Mr. Lewis.
The last thing I would say is that actually for the majority of people, they're probably not actually using that full £20,000 allowance, but it's the perception of what a potential reduction could mean.
Thank you.
Just going back to the life ISA, why should a 41-year-old who's never had the opportunity to buy a home not be able to open a lifetime ISA? Why is there an age limit of 40 for opening a lifetime ISA? I think as people are buying properties at a much older age, I think it is age discrimination, and you've got to open it before your 40th birthday. Things wrong to me. Can I just throw that in there?
Absolutely agreed.
Well, look, can I thank our witnesses very much indeed for a lively session. I'm not even going to attempt to sum it up at this point. We are hearing from a panel of LISA providers, so we'll be interested to hear what they say. We've had an awful lot of really interesting written evidence as well, so I want to put on record my thanks to those who've submitted that written evidence, including the panel. Thank you very much indeed. Order.